Hello everyone, and welcome to this Dungeon Synth tutorial video. Today we're going to be focusing on the subgenre of Dungeon Step, which I have made a recent album in, and the album is called The Dungeon Steps, and it is focused on my experimentation and my work within the genre of Dungeon Step, Dungeon House, and some Dungeoning bass as well. So today I'm going to be taking you through how I made my track, Echoes of Distant Things That Ought to Be Avoided. And this will have a little FL Studio session breakdown so that you can see exactly what I did. I apologize for the poor mic quality. It's all I've got at the moment. I'm currently living out of a caravan, so it is a little, a little limiting with what I can do. But hopefully sometime soon I might get a new microphone and a little bit of a better setup, and I might be able to do some better quality videos here. But anyway, this is Echoes of Distant Things That Ought to Be Avoided, and you might remember it from my album. This is the drop here. So there you go. There's my CPU struggling a little bit. So first things first, I'll take you through how exactly I made it. I actually started with the drum beat here. You can usually tell when you look at an FL Studio project what order things were made in just by how high they are. At least that's how you can tell in my projects. So I basically did the drums first. So if I just play, for those of you who aren't familiar with FL Studio, when you have something like this that looks like a little waveform like that, that is an audio file. So these here, this is an audio file. This is an audio file. So now it's playing, and then this is an audio file. This is an audio file. This is an audio file. And this is an audio file here. Now, most of my samples I get from Splice. Some of them I have downloaded onto my computer, but not many. Most of them I get from Splice because it's just more convenient with the amount of storage space I have to download individual samples rather than download huge sample packs that have, tens to hundreds of gigs worth of stuff. That's how I started. I started with some drums, and I'll take you through what I did here. I started with this kick, and I'll just select 4 bars like this, and I'll just play you the loop. So the kick's pretty simple. It's just a house kick that I put a little EQ on, but I didn't actually end up using the EQ. And then I put a little reverb on. So it's literally just a reverb on a kick, which normally, it's worth noting, normally you would not put reverb on a kick, and I understand that that's a big faux pas. But what I've done is I've put the low cut somewhere around 400 hertz, which means that most of the low end on the kick is completely cut out of the reverb. So all I'm reverberating out is the higher frequencies. And in Dungeon Synth, reverb is used a lot to great effect in order to add atmosphere to a place, to add an eeriness, and to add, the ambiance of the track. That's where you get a lot of it from, is from the reverb. However, in dubstep, reverb is actually not used as much. Often dubstep is very dry. However, in the London school of dubstep from the early days of the dubstep genre, reverb was used to quite great effect as well, but it's mostly petered out in recent years, with it still sticking around in deep dubstep, which is what most of this album is inspired by. It's inspired by deep dubstep and the London school of classic dubstep. So I decided I'd bring that strong, heavy reverb back. Now, the other thing is that when you're making something like dubstep, like Dungeon Step specifically, you have to try and blend the Dungeon Synth elements, which are going to be very melodic and atmospheric and heavily reverberated, with the dubstep elements, which are your drums and your heavy bass sounds. So combining heavy bass sounds, drums, and percussion with your melodic Dungeon Synth sounds, it means you have to blend them together and glue them together with something that will help them sound like they're in the same space. And something that's perfect for doing that is reverb. Now, I love Fruity Reverb too. That's what I use on everything. It's a default FL Studio plugin, and it's great. I use it for everything, and it's really, really good. So I highly recommend that plugin. You don't need to spend money on really expensive plugins, or even other free plugins. In my opinion, Fruity Reverb 2 is all you really need. So let's get on to the next drum sound. So we had a kick, and then we had this snare. So this snare is it's a sub-terra one-shot that sounds like that. And then I added a puncher on top of that, which is I got it for free. I think it costs money, but I got it for free, and it's basically a transient shaper mixed with a multi-band compressor. And I just used I think I used the default preset for that, and it just punches it a bit. So without that, it sounds like this. And then with it, it sounds like this. So you can see that tail's a little stronger, and it sounds, it sounds a little beefier in the tail end of that sound. So then what I did is I took that same snare sound, and what I did is I reversed it, and then so that it ends up sounding like this. And then what I did is I cut off the actual transient of the sound. So it used to be all the way out there to the transient, but I cut the transient off. And then I just laid them out like this, so that basically the reverberated tail of that snare would lead into that snare hit, and it sounds like this. So what gives the sound what gives the drums that sound like they're breathing is that effect that I did there. The next thing I added was this hi-hat here. Now you'll hear doing this kind of thing, doing a hi-hat. So this is the classic rhythm drum pattern, the kick, hi-hat, snare, or the kick, hi-hat, clap, hi-hat, kick, hi-hat, clap, hi-hat is a classic rhythm technique. Normally it would sound like this. So this is how you'd normally do a rhythm pattern, is you'd have the drum underneath the clap. So it sounds like this. But I decided not to do that because I liked the push and pull of having the kick going back and forth between the kick and the snare. Additionally, this clang, you wouldn't normally hear a clang in rhythm. You'd normally hear just a normal hi-hat, a sound that might be like this. Just a normal hi-hat sound. But instead, I chose to use a clang because it sounded more dungeony. It sounded that elusive dungeonness that we're always looking for. So this sounded like a more dungeon kind of sound effect. I think it sounds like a sword clanging against another sword, or maybe a blacksmith hammer hit, something like that. So that was that. I'll go through the rest of the drums before I get to any of the MIDI stuff. But I then added this hi-hat here, which ends up adding this. So, and it just adds that kind of offbeat hit. And this is something that if you're going to get into making dubstep and Dungeonstep, maybe you're a Dungeon Synth producer who wants to cross over into Dungeonstep, this is a tip I would give, is start off with a simple drum rhythm. You don't want to go too complicated, because you want to have something that bounces in a consistent pattern and gets people nodding their head along with the track. That's how you do dubstep. That's how you make it likable. But then you want to add in some bounce to that. You want to have something that actually makes not just the head nod, but to have it rocking, have a rocking kind of rhythm. And that's where you add in these offbeat little hi-hat hits that are, syncopated with the main hi-hats. So this is something that is very common in dubstep, is to do rhythms that are like this. So, and you can see why people would do that. Now, doing for this track, the Echoes of Distant Things, I thought that it needed to be more sparse, so I didn't do something like that. I kept the hi-hat pattern very simple. But you can go more complicated in dubstep. Dubstep is mostly especially London school of dubstep is very drum focused. It's almost a garage level, like two-step garage level of drum focus. Um, um, and almost, you know, in the percussion realms, you can go as hard as doing like a house shuffle in between your kick and snare hits, in like a more rhythmic version of dubstep, because you can keep your bass pattern very simple, and that way the percussion kind of plays off the bass rhythm. But when I was doing this kind of stuff, what I basically found was the rhythm dubstep being the more rhythmic side of dubstep, where it sits on one note, and the one note kind of wobbles in a rhythmic pattern, and then the kick drum kind of simply, the kick and snare kind of simply accentuates the bass rhythm. I didn't want to do that kind of a rhythm. It didn't really work. And then when I tried it, I tried this with more bro steppy kind of rhythms. That also didn't work as well. Although I did get quite a good dungeon and bass experiment that did work quite well, which ended up on the album, which is the Battle with the Whispering Wisp, which I'll probably go through as well at some point. But yeah, basically my advice would be, if you're going to take on Dungeonstep, is that the slower the tempo, not the slower the tempo, the better, but I would recommend going down below the 120 BPM mark, because Dungeon Synth is an ambient genre. It's a very ambient genre. It's inspired by dark ambient, and it's inspired by kind of old ambient synth music back before ambient had a very distinct identity, back in the 70s and 80s, when it was more just atmospheric electronic synth music. Dungeon Synth kind of hails from that kind of tradition. So it is supposed to be quite slow, and it's supposed to be atmospheric, and you don't want to lose that when you start making Dungeonstep. Dungeonstep is going to be percussive, it's going to be often loud, it's going to be eerie, it's going to be dark, but it's going to bring quite a lot of energy, and it's going to bring energy that Dungeon Synth doesn't normally have. So to maintain that that character that Dungeon Synth has, you really want to slow down the tempo a bit. Okay, so I've got a BandLab project up, because BandLab's something I use to just get some ideas out, and sometimes I make whole songs on here, especially Magic Willow. Like the Magic Willow sound, the classic Magic Willow sound, is made on BandLab largely. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get some drum pads up, maybe some. This will work for the house example. So when we're doing like house, it's 4 on the floor. So every go away. So it goes like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, and the tempo is going to be 128. Let's say 120, 124 to 128 is what you want for house. Maybe 130 if you're really pushing it, but that's the house tempo. It's like this. And you would put like a little shuffle rhythm on the offbeat, and then this is your classic house beat. And maybe a and so this is what you get for a classic house beat. And you might get like a clap on the. But now what you get when you get to dubstep is, let's say you're doing 148, and you just delete this, is the drum pattern goes kick, and instead of going directly on the next beat, you go onto 1-3. So you put the kick and the snare on the 3, and then so it sounds like this. So it's actually slower than house. So that's a dubstep beat. And then you might add like I was saying on the offbeat there, doing a hi-hat. So it'd be right? Wob, wob, wob. You can literally hear the wob wobs coming in. Wob, 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 you know? So that's how you do rhythm. So rhythm is when you have the wobs kind of playing over the top of that very simple drum pattern. And then if you're doing drum and bass, you just push that all the way up to let's say 173. And instead of doing it on like that, on the 1 and 3, you put the snare on the 2, and then you just have the, as long as you have the snare on the 2 and 4, it works. So it's kind of a it's kind of what I was saying about house. This is, you have a drum hitting on every quarter note basically, like house. So it's not half time, it's the correct time of the tempo, if that makes sense. So this is quite fast. And then you might have on drum and bass, you might have like a whoa, 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 whoa. You know, that's the sort of thing you get in drum and bass. So drum and bass is quite fast compared to both dubstep and house. When you get back to what I was doing, this is all to say that when I was experimenting with Dungeonstep, I pushed the tempo of dubstep from 140 to 150 down past 120, all the way down to like 110-ish. And that's where I ended up with this really slow halftime rhythm, which is really playing at about a 54.5 BPM. So very, very slow, because I don't know if you know this, but the slowest that the human ear can still hear it is musical is 30, or it being a consistent rhythm is about, I think it's 32 or 33 BPM. So pushing it down to 44.5 is really slow. And the reason why I'm saying 44.5, of course, is because, 54.5 is because it's 109, and the drum pattern is going half time, because the main drums, the kick and the snare, are happening on every second beat instead of every beat. So it is really playing at about a 54.5 BPM, and this is what it sounds like. Now if I add in the drum fills here, this is I chopped up some drum fills and I layered them on top of each other, and of course added a lot of reverb and some EQ and some other things, and this is what this ended up sounding like. Now, fills are extremely important in dubstep because they keep the track moving forward, they keep it from getting repetitive. And they also add a tension and release to the end and beginning of each bar. And this is something that, like, as a Dungeon Synth producer, you may not have thought about, because Dungeon Synth is not a very high tension genre. It's not a genre that thrives on tension. It thrives more on relaxation. And so that means an atmosphere, of course, and that means that the end of your bar doesn't need to really satisfyingly resolve to the next bar. But what I'm doing here with this drum fill is setting up the end of the 4th bar to resolve back to the 5th bar, and the 5th bar being a satisfying continuation of that rhythm. So the way I'd put it is, if I went back here to my handy little sketch pad here, is if I had a rhythm that was like this, kind of was just a clap like this, and I just had this on repeat for a long time, and I hit play, eventually it gets extremely boring. It gets extremely boring if it's just on loop like that. Whereas if I start going like at a kick like this, and take out some of this, okay, it's all right. It's a little boring. Now I'm going to bring the tempo down to a dubstep tempo because I'm making dubstep. Okay, it's a little boring. Now if I add some variation, let's say I take out this clap here and I just make a rhythm beat. Okay, it's a little better. but you still hear there's no tension and release. It's just rocking back and forth from the kick to the snare. Well, that's where we add in this kind of, we add some bounce. We add a hi-hat on the offbeat, right? Now we have, okay, that's pretty good, but there's still, it's just some rock, right? It's just a little bit of rocking. So we want to add something at the end that's going to, or something after a while that's going to add some interest to the track. And people who do like ambient music will know a lot about adding points of interest, because it's one of the things you can do to really spice up your ambient tracks, is to add some like little effects or sound effects or whatever in the background to help the track feel alive. So let's listen to this now. So it's the same beat we had. I've just made it a little longer so that at the end of this one, we can add a little fill. And then when we loop it, sounds a little better. Now if we add a hi-hat up here, so what I'm basically showing you is that the same way that melodies and chord progressions resolve, so do rhythms resolve, right? This is very complicated. Maybe I'll go into EDM music theory at some point. This is something that I've just learned through years and years of trial and error. But basically, when you get to the end of a bar or a repeated idea, the melody is going to build up. It's going to have tension. The chord progression is going to have tension, and then the rhythm also, when you're doing a rhythmic genre, it also needs tension, and then it needs to be at its peak tension at the end of the bar, and then it needs to drop and resolve at the start of the next bar. That's how you make EDM. So this here, if you were to listen to this, this does not resolve. It has a little bit of tension at the end, but doesn't resolve rhythmically. Because it goes dun da, ticka dun da, ticka dun da. So, and it just feels like it just keeps going. It feels like the ticka doesn't actually resolve to anything. So what we're going to do is find something that can then go to. Maybe this. Oh, come on. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, sometimes this is not drawing when I want it to, but that's all right. Okay, let's listen now. That's better. So you can see there, it resolves a little better. So now what we've got is a rhythm that as it plays, we've got the hi-hat fill at the end here, kind of moving us into the hi-hat rhythm of the next pattern. And so what it does is it kind of draws your attention for a moment and then makes the next repetition more satisfying, if that makes sense. So now if we listen again, you can hear that kind of going on. So that's what I'm trying to do here. When you add in a fill, that's what you're trying to do, is add some rhythmic tension / resolution. And now if I play this, listen to where the fill takes your mind in terms of when you listen to the next repetition. When you hear the next repetition, what story is told on top of the fill as a resolution to the fill, if that makes sense. So just watch your own attention to the mix and to the track and see where it takes you. So to me, that's drawing me more to the bass, it's drawing me more to the snare, and it's helping me to feel those drums stronger. I feel the drums stronger because the fill sets me up on a high to then drop back down onto those drums. And that's really that's the purpose of a fill, is to help you feel the rest of it. Now we can get onto the actual bass elements, and this will be this was what actually took me the longest. So doing all the drums and everything, it's pretty second nature to me at this point. So I'll just show you how I made these basses. This took me so long. This first bass, the Dungeonstep Womp, this is a preset that I'll probably make available in the future for you to buy or download or whatever. I might even put it up, like I might start a Patreon and put it up on Patreon for you to get. But this was what it sounds like. This is what it sounds like, which is pretty. I think it's a pretty awesome sound, if I do say so myself. Somewhere between like a low wub and also pulling off Velcro. It's quite satisfying, and that satisfying like white noise sound comes from the added AC hum here on the noise section. That has a level coming in here, and it's being modulated by the low cut filter, by the low pass filter. So I'll actually show you exactly what's going on here. This is our LFO. It's a simple just triangle wave like this. And this LFO is modulating the level on our analog sine, which is it's actually a bass drum sine. So as you change the wavetable position, it has different parts of a bass drum hit. But I've just kept it on the first position. But if you wanted to have more like timbre options, you could. So that's what I've done there. And then if I go to FX, I've added a distortion. So if I turn these off, this is actually what it sounds like. So pretty quiet when you first hear, but then you go to the tube distortion. That adds a little bit. And then we add the multiband compressor, and this is where everything comes to life. The multiband compressor on Serum is the friend of many dubstep producers all over the world. It's extremely useful. Others just use the OTT plugin, but this is how it makes it sound. So it brings out all those frequencies, and it's just awesome. Basically, all dubstep basses will have a multiband compressor put on them, or just a compressor. Compressors and saturators are used a lot. But now if we go and look at the actual effects chain on this, we also have another distortion, which is the Ravage Light. So without it, it sounds like this, and without the reverb, it sounds like this. So the process I went through was I first designed this sound, very quiet, and then I added this, then I added this, then I added this Ravage Light distortion, which is an awesome, Ravage Light is an awesome plugin. I don't know if it's still available. You may have to buy the full version, but this is what that sounds like. And then with the reverb, so there you go. That's how I designed that sound. It's just a simple sine wave with some saturation and some noise, really. But the key is in tweaking all of those little parameters just to make it sound as good as you can. Then we have this next sound, which this is a more complicated sound. So I'll show you how I did this. So what is actually going on here is first I'm playing this oscillator. And I'll turn off all the effects too, and we'll come back to this, and we'll turn off all of these effects too. So as you can hear, this is just a sine wave, and all it's doing is it's going through this filter, which is a low pass filter, and the cutoff is being triggered by this LFO. So as this LFO goes by on a 1/8 triplet, this is modulating the cutoff up to allow this sine wave through. Now we have this sine wave. This sine wave is down 2 octaves. So while I'm playing this in the 4th octave, this is playing down in the 2nd octave, so it's very low. And then this is playing in the 3rd octave, the sub. So there's 2 sine waves being triggered, one in the 2nd octave, one in the 3rd octave. This one then is playing in the 5th or 6th octave, I think actually 7th octave. So it's very high. And then we have this LFO, which is linked to the FM from B, And what this does is it basically takes this oscillator of the very high pitched sine wave and modulates the low pitched sine wave with that via a thing called FM synthesis. I'm not going to explain FM synthesis. When you get into like the depths of sound design, you can figure that out for yourself. And then we go off to FX. So that's what it sounds like. It's not a great sound. It's pretty harsh. But then if we add in that's because of the high pitched ringing. But when you add in the tube distortion, and then we add in another EQ which filters it, and then we add in the crunch of that compressor, and then we add in our effector. Now effector, I've just put it on lo-fi, which is a bit crusher. So this is just a bit crusher with a little more fancy name, but it goes like this. Then I added a reverb, and then of course that ravage light for some saturation. And that's actually a very simple sound for most dubstep, but for Dungeonstep, it's good to keep the sound simple just to keep that retro aesthetic. But you're welcome to add some more complex sound design if you end up trying this genre yourself. Now this next bass is exactly the same. It's just a slightly different sound timbrally. I don't exactly know what I changed, but it's a slightly different sound. You can hear it's just a slight bit harsher, and I don't exactly know what I did here. It was, if you can see any of these knobs or dials that are slightly different, but that exists for some reason. And then we have this sound here. This is a preset called Wander from the Witch House pack by Shaman Stems. I highly recommend his Witch House pack, or their Witch House pack. I don't know what the gender is, but yeah, I highly recommend that Witch House pack because it's got some amazing Dungeon Synth presets. And then this is a bass that I use just for like a little bass fill, which is called Skrill Me. And I don't remember who made this preset. I don't know if that's the name of the person who created it, but anyway, I got it off Splice and it's pretty good. It is reminiscent of the Skrillex Purple Lamborghini bass. Then we have I got this synth, which is the Kashmir Woodwind Jungle Whistle synth. And so you can probably hear that in a lot of my tracks, especially my Wizards of Aldor tracks. I use that preset a lot. I love it. This is my sub bass that I made. So I'll turn all the effects off here, and I'll turn off I think that's routed here. Yep. So let's just listen to that. It's just literally a sine wave, and then let's add the effects, some distortion, and then a compressor. So this one's not multi-band; it's just a compressor, and then a blood overdrive to add some more fatness. And you get that sound, and that sound just plays underneath all of it to add that kind of rumble to the track that we want for bigger sound systems. This is Samplifier's Brahms preset, which is my favorite. It's one of my favorite synth presets of all time. I love it. And Samplifier is a very good rhythm producer and DJ if you're interested in that kind of thing. And then we have the Audio Imperia pad. I don't remember what it's called because I think it's just Magic. Is it Magic Animated Pad? I don't remember. Anyway, this is how it goes. I've used that on a few of my tracks as well, namely in Pawn of Prophecy. I've used it quite a bit in that album. And then this is an Atmos pad from Audio Imperia. Again, this one. And I spent so much time working on those basses, I just didn't have time to work on a pad. I was not interested in doing that. I'd spent, a couple hours just fiddling to make those bass sounds sound good and to really make a composition which fit with the drum pattern. So altogether, those bass sounds sound like this. And I'll actually extend this out because what I did here was I extended the pattern to be 8 bars long. And if I'll now add in them, I'll show you what the melodies turned out like. So that's what the melodies are playing, and that's just that witch house synth. And then this is the bass, the sub bass. So that's pretty sick. And what makes it do that, you can see here, I've just got one note on the bottom and then I've just got it jumping up and down to these notes. The way you do that is you go into your synth here, you turn on mono, and I think that's it. I think if you just turn on mono, you're able to, and maybe legato, I think, and then basically it just jumps from it automatically jumps between notes instead of playing it like a chord. And then this is the atmosphere that I had underneath all of that. So now if I play the synths together, this is what they all sound like together. And now, if we listen to it all together with the drums, it sounds like this. So I'll say one more thing about the composition of this whole thing that has to do with making EDM in a way that is more satisfying. And that is breathing out feels a whole lot better when you've held your breath for a little bit. So if you hold your breath for a little bit and then breathe out, it feels better to do that than it would have if you had to just breathe in and out normally. This is also true of this kind of music. So what I've done here is you have this bass playing all the way through here. But you'll see here, just before this second bar, about halfway through, I've actually cut out that bass intentionally so that you're waiting for something to happen and then you get hit with this ride. So you have this kind of breathe in just before the ride hits, and that's the breathe out. Breathe in and out. Do you see? So as the ride hits, you breathe in here and then the ride hits and you breathe out. And I don't mean this literally, I mean this like metaphorically with how you're listening to the music. And I've also done this at the end here, but it's more pronounced because this builds up like this, and I'll add the bass here as well in the ride. This builds up, this one here, and then this gives you the so you get that held breath just for a moment as the bass cuts out, and it sounds like this. And if we add in this kick, and that's how you get that. That's what I mean when I say you can have a rhythmic resolution as well as a melodic resolutions, because I don't really have many melodic things going on at this point in the song. I mean I do, but they're kind of in the background, and that's one of the joys of doing something like Dungeonstep instead of dubstep, is that in Dungeonstep you really can just have these synths going on in the background. You don't normally do that in dubstep. In dubstep, the melodics are saved for the intro and the outro, and they're not really used in the drop. So adding that in with the melodic resolution, it's a little more satisfying. And if you add in the other drums and everything else, it just adds a little bit more of that interest. It's not like, you know, it's not amazing or perfect or anything. This is just normal EDM kind of composition. But for those of you who aren't aware of this kind of thing, it might help. So now when you go into the next half of the drop, usually in dubstep or EDM, you do a bit of a switch up where you change it up a bit and make it a bit different. But again, Dungeon Synth is more of an ambient genre, so you don't really switch things up all that much. It's a little more repetitive and whatever than EDM, and that's kind of the appeal. So what I did instead was add in a layer. So I added in this 115 BPM hi-hat pattern, which I've then bit crushed using the lo-fi tool on Effector, added some EQ to take out some of that high end and a little bit of reverb. And then I've also added in, this is what that sounds like with the rest of the drums. If I just take the drums like this. And I also forgot to mention I did add a snare in the second half of the pattern with, I did add a snare here on top of the clap. Oh, sorry, on top of the, I added a snare on top of the other snare just to fatten out the snare a little bit, the snare sound. So then we have this flute that's added as well. Super simple melody, but when it comes in over the top of all of this, it just adds that kind of mystical fantasy whimsy that I love so much. There you go. So that's how I went about making a Dungeonstep drop for this particular track. And join me next time as I go through how I made, I might go through how I made the Dungeon and Bass, like the jump up Dungeon and Bass track, the Battle with the Whispering Wisp, and also how I make some of my Dungeon House stuff. I might even do a full tutorial on how to make Dungeonstep. But that was just a quick breakdown of, and maybe some advice for those of you who want to attempt making Dungeonstep. And yeah, I hope you got something out of it and are looking forward to making your own stuff. So there you go. Welland out.